Thank you. So yesterday, Free Angela screened as a gala at Roy Thompson Hall. And it was something of a historic occasion in the 37 years of the history of the Toronto Film Festival. It was the first time a documentary that wasn't a music documentary ever screened as a gala film. And we thought when we saw this film that it had the kind of emotional depth and historic scope that really made sense for it to be playing alongside other gala films like Robert Redford's The Company You Keep, which in fact has kind of similar historic themes. So I'm going to ask a question of each of the people on the panel, and then we'll open this up to the room. But Shala, let me start with you. Why did you want to make this film in the first place? And once you had that idea, how tricky was it?
I wanted to make the film because what I knew of her was, as you see our poster, the afro. And I thought I knew the story. And as I began to do just the bare minimum of research, I realized there's a woman behind the icon. And I was interested in knowing how she developed from a philosophy professor, a young philosophy professor, into a political icon. What are the choices that she made? What were the intended and unintended consequences? And as I researched that, I realized that it was a crime, political crime drama. And I said, this is a great story. I then only had to talk her into it.
Maybe we can come to that process in a minute. Well, Angela, let me get your perspective. I mean, you wrote your autobiography many years ago. What was your reaction when Shala came to you to propose a film? Maybe she's not the first person who's ever tried to do this before.
Well, I must admit I was somewhat reluctant, and I've always been a reluctant public person. So my first impression was, do I really want to do this again? But then I thought about the potential of such a documentary that, as she pointed out, would focus very specifically on the trial and on the campaign that developed around my case. And I thought it might be important to speak to young people in the 21st century about movements that were powerful and were victorious. 40 years ago, no one could have imagined that despite the fact that I was innocent, I would be able to stand up to the power of the state, particularly as incarnated by Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. But that campaign that developed all over the world and on literally every continent made it possible for us to experience that victory. And so I thought it might be important for young people today to get a sense of what it meant to feel collectively powerful and capable of changing the world. We need a lot of that today.
And if I can ask a follow-up question, what was it like for you to watch the film with an audience and see how it's been received in the last 24 hours?
Well, yesterday was the first time I saw the completed film. And I had a range of emotions. First of all, I was very impressed. Second, I was very sad when I saw certain images that brought back very bad memories. I was sad to see people who had been very active in the campaign, so vibrant on the screen, but who are no longer with us today. And then, as I told Shala, I learned things about the case that I never knew. So 40 years later, I discovered how the FBI actually caught me.
That was something that Shala had unearthed? Or?
Well, she interviewed an FBI agent. The FBI never came to me to tell me how they tracked me down.
And she had never accessed her FBI files. But what she gave me as an opportunity, she gave me the notarized permission so that I could access the full files. I mean, opportunity.
absolutely.
So before I get to Issa, Shala, can you kind of set up for me how you use Issa in the film?
There are so many moments in this story where there is absolutely no archival footage, and we know what happened through the FBI files and all of that. And I kept thinking, I want to do something. I want to do recreations, but recreations in documentaries, as we all know, can go so wrong. So I worked with Bradford Young, and we came up with a concept, but we needed an Angela. And even in silhouette, because really the images are dark, moody, they're silhouetted. It's not about it's not about making the narrative. We didn't have that budget. And I had been talking to Issa, and emotionally, intellectually, her body, the way she moved, she knew her aunt so well and had thought about these things through her own work. She's a playwright. Angela's Mixtape is a play that she has that's based on growing up in this kind of famous family. She just got it. And Bradford and I were like, we have to go with Issa. There's just no way. There's no way. And we moved heaven and earth to work with her schedule and to get her to do it. And to me, the images just hit the emotional tones and notes. So Issa Davis is our Angela.
So Issa, I want to ask you,
And her name is Angela Issa Davis.
Yeah, but please, you have to tell them what her original name was before Angela insisted on the change.
Well, yes, my sister was pregnant throughout several months of the ordeal.
You can see it in the footage also, Vanya.
Yeah, and she visited me in my cell on the day she went into labor. And so she wanted to name Issa after me. She had devoted so much of her life traveling around the world and so forth, and because we're very close. And she wanted to name her Angela Libre. And I said, no. You cannot saddle that child with such a burden for the rest of her life. So her name became Angela Issa.
Right. And then, of course, what's fun is that, no one ever called me Angela Issa Davis unless I was in trouble. I was always called by my middle name Issa, but of course on my passport or on my driver's license it says Angela Issa Davis. So every time I go to the airport or have to show my ID, everyone says, "Are you Angela Davis?" And I say, "Well, she's my aunt."
Now you can say no, but I play her in a film.
Right, exactly.
So Issa, what was it like for you as someone who comes from this family who knows this history as a family history to see it get interpreted through Shala's eyes?
Well, it's very exciting actually for me to be able to have been part of this process from the very beginning. Shala is a tenacious woman. That's the only way you get something like this done. And she clawed her way to us as a family in order to get this done. And so, I just have been, like Angela, very grateful to be able to see all of the research that went into the making of this documentary, and then to be able to see, as I said last night, watching the film, which I also saw for the first time yesterday, in some ways was like seeing a home movie, because there are all of these people that I have known as family members, as people who were part of the campaign and part of the trial, who remained close to us, and still are, those who are still alive. And then, of course, there were images that took place before I was born, because I was born, of course, while Angela was in jail. So it's been really an amazing experience to be asked to assume the feelings that Angela must have felt while she was underground, while she was imprisoned. And I think that everything that I've experienced growing up with my mother and my aunt, who told me all of these things, was able to come through in the film in a way that I never expected. I felt like it all kind of burst out of me, and that I knew all of this stuff in my bones, in my genes, in my marrow, and I was really grateful to be able to express that on film.
We want to go to the audience for some questions. We have some microphones going around. We'll bring one to Bruce right here. Please identify yourself.
Yes, Bruce Kirkland, Toronto Sun. I'm fascinated by the power of single images, even though this is an entire film. A single still image, whether it's Che Guevara caught in a single photograph, whether it's the Black Power salute at the Mexico Olympics, whether it's yourself in a silhouette, that all these years later, that can be on the poster, and even people who know nothing about your true story but may be curious about it and want to see the film will have a visceral reaction to this image. So that's great that's on the poster. I'm curious what your personal relationship is with an image like that. How do you process that now at this point in your life, that it represents a certain part of your life that you're now retelling?
Well, of course, because I'm putatively the subject of the image, I have a more complicated relationship to it. And it took me quite a long time to feel comfortable in my relationship with that image, because I always insisted, well, it's really not me. It's an image that has been produced and that circulates in a certain way. But I'm not all that is ascribed to that image. And then I've told this story quite a number of times. I encountered a very young woman, high school age, a few years ago, and she was wearing a T-shirt with my image on it. And I used to sort of really feel embarrassed and shy away. And people would even give me T-shirts. I said, why are you giving it to me? I'm never going to wear this. And so this young woman knew very little about the history. But I asked her, why are you wearing this T-shirt? And she said, because it makes me feel empowered, because it makes me feel as if I can do anything I want to do. And so at that point, I reconciled myself to the work that the image performs. And at the same time, I have to recognize that it is not me. It is a constructed and created image that does have an enormous amount of power.
That's a great poster.
We have a question up front. We'll bring you a microphone.
Linda Carter for G98.7. I am so honored to be here. I haven't seen the film yet, but I mean, I've lived your history. I've been very excited to be here to talk to you. But tell me, what do you think is the mantra for today for young people of color? Is it food? Is it education? Is it family? What would you say is the struggle today? There's a lot.
I think it's all of those things and more. What I should have said in response to the question about the image is that the image embodies a collective power. And I think people relate to it precisely because of that, even though they may not be able to articulate it. Older people who have memories, historical memories of that era, are usually remembering their own youth. They're usually remembering that sense of possibility and potential power in which they participated. So you might say they see themselves in that image. And I would say about young people today that each generation finds its own way. And I think that 40 years later, after the events on which this film is based, we're experiencing a resurgence of activism. And I am totally impressed by young people, and especially by the ability to think in complicated ways. And so that a question like that, what is the most important struggle, might have been repeatedly asked 40 years ago, and we might have taken it seriously. But I think today many young activists would say it's not so much which is the most important struggle. The question is, how do we find the connections that bring all of these struggles together? And how can we choose our own commitment and activism based on our own passions for particular issues, but at the same time recognize that there is this intersectionality, to use a feminist term, that there is this interconnection among all of the struggles for social justice, whether it's war, whether it's racism, whether it's challenging the pollution of the environment, whether it's animal rights, whether it's homophobia, whether it's a whole range of issues. Even food, of course, is emerging as an extremely important focus of radical politics. And I think we'll always be discovering new ways of expressing our desires and aspirations for the future.
Chala, I want to ask you a question in constructing this film. This history is it's a contested history. It involves things like FBI files. It involves passionate feelings on either side of the subject. Can you talk about how you approached such a contested history, and what were the things that you were keeping in mind to keep it real?
Well, I wanted to find whatever truth I could find. That there are facts and there is evidence, and that requires talking to as many people as possible. The FBI files, believe it or not, are a wonderful resource because they document everything meticulously. And bringing all these things together in a compelling story, though, I wanted it to feel authentic for somebody who lived it. The feeling, the intensity. When you say the revolution is right around the corner, if you don't set that up in the proper context to a contemporary audience, it's laughable. It's funny. There's no way to understand it. So I was always mindful of two audiences and the emotional qualities of the scenes of the film. I wanted it to ring true, whether they felt like every detail was in it or not, for the people that lived through that period. Somebody's always going to say, you forgot so-and-so, or this moment, or that. But also then for the younger audience, it couldn't be it couldn't be 3 hours. It had to be, we went for 90, we got 99, 101 with credits. It needed to move along and work as a constructed story. So we spent a long time making all of the elements work together.
Got a question right here. Get to the microphone.
Luca Celada from Il Manifesto in Italy. Professor Davis, when you look back at COINTELPRO and the repression that the counterculture was subject to back then, do you think it's legitimate to see it in the same vein as, say, the communist witch hunt of McCarthy era, and by the same token of something which is happening, for instance, with Assange today and the WikiLeaks?
Well, I think, certainly during each era, the repression builds on previous modes of repression. And, certainly the COINTELPRO drew from the McCarthy era. As a matter of fact, during the era of COINTELPRO, there was still a great deal of anti-communism, not only in the FBI, but in the discourses that circulated in general. As a matter of fact, my story, the story that gets depicted in the film, started when I was fired from my position as a result of being a member of the Communist Party. And that came as a shock to me. It never occurred to me that I would be fired for being a communist.
To teach Marxism.
After all, I had been invited to teach Marxism. So I think that the COINTELPRO relied on anti-communism. The construction of the terrorists also relies on strategies that were developed in connection with the anti-communist witch hunts and COINTELPRO.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
and I would just say, you know, that state structures continue to evolve. They, you know, move at a much more glacial pace than individuals do. And so, you know, there are a lot of people who, of course, were the same ones in those agencies, in the FBI, the CIA, and Hoover was around for quite some time, you know. So I would just say that there's a shorter or a longer rate of evolution.
Yeah, I always say that institutions have very long memories. They have memories that are much longer than individual memories.
And there was also a lot of mistrust during the period. One of the things that Angela tells us is that she was suspected of being an agent. Because here's this woman who's European trained, speaks 2 languages, a philosophy professor, and she's trying to find out what's going on in the black community. Well, we didn't know that COINTELPRO existed then, but there is this mistrust, so it cut both ways.
Well,
Those are my
yeah,
favorite
and
lines.
I suppose I was rather naive, but in retrospect, it makes sense that someone who has just returned from Europe is nosing around asking, what does this organization do, and may I join that organization? So I understand why people may have thought that I was an agent.
I loved it.
I think this gentleman here has a question.
Yeah, Bill Meyer from the People's World. And you've been a committed communist activist most all your life. And I know you now you can add to that being a movie star. And I'm sure reluctant as it was. However, I'm curious, you are still in the struggle. You're still working on many issues. Do you still see the anti-communism in society? Do you still see it as a struggle? And do you think this movie will have any opposition?
Yes. And the point that Issa made about institutional memories being very long, I think that that we will re-experience some of that anti-communism. I do think that it is important to point out that that the anti-communism of the past is not the same anti-communism we experience in the present, and that young people are much more open, and especially given the development of the Occupy movement in the last year, there's an ability to be critical of capitalism. There's a public discourse on capitalism, anti-capitalism, that has not been around, say, since the 1920s and the 1930s, when the Communist Party was responsible in the U.S. for developing such things as Social Security and unemployment insurance and so forth and so on.
Question in the back?
Hello, Angela. First of all, thank you for your courage, and it's an honor to even be in the same room with you. I'm from that era as well. I'm from the 60s, and I remember back then, of course, the Panthers, yourself, other freedom fighters. Do you think that, I have a twofold question. First of all, do you think that, is there any young youthful activists these days that you see a lot of hope in a particular movement? And also, do you think that there will ever be another group as powerful as the Black Panthers as far as willing to put their lives on the line for freedom?
Well, first of all, I see a lot of youthful enthusiasm I work largely within the prison abolitionist movement, and that movement is a very, very young movement. Although there are some of us who have been around to experience several instantiations of that movement, over the last decades. But as I was saying before, I think young people are in a much better situation today because they, the cliche is they stand on our shoulders, but they not so much stand on our shoulders as they are able to benefit from the past accomplishments so that they can move much further. They can see much further than we could have possibly seen then. So yes, there are quite a lot of movements. The anti-prison movement, I've been speaking a lot about the movement to defend the rights of trans prisoners, which is really important, not only with respect to how it sheds light on the repression to which trans people have been subjected, but because of how it reveals the power of institutions to shape our ideas and the role that an institution like the prison plays as a gendering apparatus, so that the impact is not only on those inside, but the impact is on all of us. Prisons are generally male prisons, female prisons, prisons for women, prisons for men. What happens to those who don't fit into those neat gender categories? So I think that these are strategies and theories that are developing largely as a result of the participation of young people in these movements. And then I mentioned the food movement, which is really important, particularly given the extent to which food is produced by these vast capitalist industrial enterprises, and how it is making so many people around the world so sick. There are diseases that are directly attributable to the capitalist production of food. So I could speak for, the next, hour about new ideas that have emerged as a result of the ideas of young people. And I think that older people have to be willing to learn from young people.
And if I can add just one thing, I would like to also represent my mother here, because what I love about this documentary is it gives Angela a chance to talk to you and talk more about the work that she does now, as well as, it's sort of that this time period which brought her to everyone's mind and brought her into the spotlight, as it were, now allows her political views to be heard by you now. And so she's changed your life. And she's changed my mother's life, her younger sister. And my mother became a civil rights attorney because of the victory that she saw in the process of Angela's trial. And she worked litigating just a vast number of discrimination cases over her lifetime as a lawyer. And it's very interesting because when you're talking about movements that are occurring now, and something that I think is a wonderful complement to all of Angela's prison abolition work that she does, is that my mother does a great deal of restorative justice work. So after litigating and fighting all of these for all of the rights of people who have had their lives damaged by being in prison, she thought, why don't I actually go to the root? Why don't we actually look at how people go into the criminal justice system to begin with? There's some discussion, of course, George Jackson in this film, who was given an indeterminate sentence of 1 year to life, because someone else that he was in a car with took $70 from a service station. 1 year to life. He served a total of 11 years in prison before he was gunned down. And if you actually can employ some of these restorative justice techniques and principles, you don't actually put people into the criminal justice system, which of course is metastasizing as we speak. It's a cancer, it really is. So what restorative justice does is it looks at how you keep people from going into the criminal justice system to begin with, and I think that that's something that is very important that this film allows us the opportunity to speak about.
We'll take one or two more questions. Let me, I see a fresh face in the back. And
my question towards Angela. I'm from China. This is Lisa Fan from Epoch Times newspaper. And you talk about the communism, here's anti-communism. But actually, China and the Soviet Union, those countries and the Eastern European countries, a lot of them said they founded based on the communism, and actually people suffered from the dictatorship, and truly there's no freedom to choose their belief. And there's a monument in DC is dedicated to the victims of the communism. And I just wondered, like you said, probably 50 years ago, 60 years ago, so people's believing communism or view on it is quite different than now. Even in China right now, hardly anybody believes in communism, including the leadership. So what's your view of the communism now or compared to before? Thank you.
Okay, we've kind of gotten far afield from the film, and I think that maybe I'll answer that briefly, but I think that Shala, who is the filmmaker, should have the last word at this press conference. I would say that I still am very much a person who believes that we need a new world, that we need alternatives to the existing structures of capitalism that have insinuated themselves into the lives of people, all over the world. I know that there were serious problems with the modes of communism that were realized in various countries, but I think it's important that we not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that we say that just because there were problems with communism, we refuse to even imagine that there might be a possibility of something beyond capitalism. And I think we've reached the point where, those of us who are not associated with Wall Street and are not reaping all of the profits, capitalist profits, where we want to believe that it's possible to have a world where education is valued, where people's health is valued, where we can have free education, and so I continue very much to hold on to that which I think provides somewhat of a vision for the future. And I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but I can say that those of us who are active in the prison abolitionist movement believe that prisons cannot be abolished as long as capitalism still prevails over us all, and that we are going to have to fight for a better world. And in a sense, I think that's, I don't know whether you experienced that in watching the film, but I kind of re-experience that sense of possibility that and as I said in the film, my mother used to say to us as kids growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, and there's some really beautiful images of my mother in the film, to my mother and father. My mother used to say, when we wanted to know, why things were as they were in the Jim Crow South, why couldn't we as black children go to the library or go to the symphony. And she always said, this is not the way things are supposed to be. And in a sense, I attribute her inculcating that sense of not being ensconced in the present to my later decision to study philosophy and critical theory. Because as a child, I learned how to be in the Jim Crow South, but to imagine a time when things would be different, where we would be living in a better world.
Well, I will wrap this up with a question to Shala. Shala, I wonder, after the time you spent interviewing Angela, having gone through this process, are there questions that you still have left to ask Angela?
She asked me a lot of questions that you don't see in the film.
I kind of trapped her for 2 days, talking for hours and hours. I more have a comment because, you know, the interview was only one part of getting to know her and kind of fact-checking and authenticating. And you know, often when you work on a documentary like this over years, it's 7 years, you find the cracks in people's stories. And I was amazed that Angela was who she said she was. I mean, she is who she said she was, and she is. And that there is a certain level of commitment to her principles that you see kind of developing in this piece. And I think it's dramatic the way that it develops. The choices that she has to make on the fly in this under enormous pressure. And so we tried to bring the intensity of those feelings alive. And I was really struck by that because you always find something. And I looked, Angela. I mean, I wanted to be able to getcha. And then the other thing was watching the screening yesterday in the gala. I didn't realize how funny our film was. There were moments where, you know, like we were working so hard for so long and trying to get the story work that we had kind of overlooked the humor in which everybody involved kind of approached this crazy situation. And I would also say this also for the other side, you know, I mean, we weren't interested in making Reagan or Nixon, you know, bad people. They also, there was the 70s, there was a certain, they thought they were trying to save, they thought they were trying to do the right thing in their way, and it's this colliding, and nobody has any PR agents. Nobody has like hair and makeup and handlers and whatever. So people say what they mean, and the footage reflects that. It's so refreshing because all the mistakes are there for us to see and say, oh, right, I can think this through. There is a process, there are choices. And that's what I like about the film, and that's why I am grateful to Angela for not micromanaging in the least the process and allowing, trusting me as a filmmaker, well, giving the door, and then I shoved my elbow in my foot, you know, Issa said, as Issa said, in to create this work and interpret her life. In fact, we were arguing about it the other day before she saw the film. I kept saying, well, this is part of your life. This is your life. She goes, no, this is your film.
Well,
both, and let me say that if you haven't seen Shala's film on Shirley Chisholm on Boston Unbought, you should really see that. That was really the reason why I decided to agree to let her make this film, because I was so impressed by the work that she did with Shirley Chisholm.
She said to me, I thought I knew that story. And then she paused. And this is my memory of it, Angela. You can disagree if you like. And the way that she said it made me realize that she doesn't really know her story, that there's so many aspects of it. And so I went for it, and that's what you see here. I mean, it's partially her story, she talks to me, but it is this weaving together of this historical moment, and hopefully what it does is it rings true and is authentic in a damn good political crime drama.
well, Chisholm 72, Unbought and Unbossed, that was 2004, now Free Angela and All Political Prisoners, 2012. We hope that it's a much shorter gap before you're back here with your next film. Thank you all very much for being here. Thanks especially to Essie Davis, Angela Davis, and Shala Lynch.